There is a specific sound that signals the end of peaceful suburbia. It isn't a gunshot, and it isn't a siren. It is the PSSHHT of pneumatic air brakes disengaging on a 30-ton vehicle, followed by the low tectonic rumble of a Detroit Diesel Series 60 engine idling at 700 RPM. I watched Mrs. Higgins drop her watering can. It hit the pavement in slow motion, spilling water all over her pristine New Balance sneakers. She didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed on the red wall of steel currently blocking out the sun in my driveway. "Easy, girl. Easy," I muttered, gripping a steering wheel the size of a manhole cover. I checked my side mirror. All I saw was red. Just acres of red metal, diamond plate chrome, and the reflection of a terrified squirrel scrambling up an oak tree. I was currently attempting to parallel park a 1998 Pierce pumper fire truck into a driveway designed for a Honda Civic. It was going poorly. "Left hard! Hard left!" I yelled to no one, wrestling the wheel. The power steering on this thing was less assist and more suggestion. The truck lurched backward. The backup alarm began to scream, "Beep, beep, beep," a sound specifically engineered to pierce through double-paned glass and human sanity. It echoed off the vinyl siding of the cookie-cutter houses of Oak Creek Estates like a war cry. I feathered the brake. The massive bumper, which was essentially a steel girder dipped in chrome, hovered 3 inches from my mailbox. If I hit that mailbox, I lost. Not the car accident. The mailbox would disintegrate instantly. But the moral victory. I needed this park to be surgical. I needed it to be perfect. I pulled the parking brake. "Psst." The beast settled. The suspension hissed. I killed the engine, and the neighborhood fell into a stunned, ringing silence. I opened the driver's door and climbed down. Literally climbed. It was a 3-step descent. I hit the pavement, dusted off my hands, and took a deep breath. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, blooming jasmine, and unburnt diesel fuel. It smelled like freedom. "Jack?" I turned. Mrs. Higgins was standing at the edge of her lawn, clutching her pearls. She was a sweet woman, 80 years old, who baked cookies that tasted like dust and love. "Good morning, Mrs. Higgins," I beamed, adjusting my sunglasses. She pointed a trembling finger at the 40-foot-long emergency vehicle dominating my property. Is there a fire?" "Oh, no, ma'am," I said, patting the massive front tire, which came up to my chest. "Just doing some landscaping. Upgrading the toolkit, you know?" "Landscaping," she repeated, looking at the light bar on the roof. "You know how the fescue gets in July," I said solemnly. "Requires aggressive hydration." She nodded slowly, processing this. In Oak Creek Estates, lawn care was a religion. If I told her I needed a tactical nuke to get rid of crabgrass, she'd probably ask where to sign the petition. "Well," she whispered, "it's very ridumps." "It is indeed, Mrs. Higgins. It is indeed." But Mrs. Higgins wasn't the target audience. I checked my watch. 10:03 a.m. On a Saturday. He would be here in less than 2 minutes. The disturbances in the force were already rippling through the subdivision. And there he was. Brendan. The president of the Oak Creek Estates Homeowners Association. A man who once measured my grass with a ruler because he suspected it was 1/8 of an inch over regulation. A man who wore polo shirts tucked into cargo shorts with a belt that had a cell phone holster and a Leatherman tool. He didn't walk, he marched. His clipboard was already out, a weapon drawn for battle. He stopped at the edge of my driveway, his face turning a shade of purple that clashed horribly with his salmon polo. He stared at the truck. He stared at me. He stared back at the truck. "Jack," Brendan said. His voice was tight, like a violin string about to snap and take out an eye. "Brendan," I replied pleasantly. "Great cargo shorts. Plenty of pocket space today. Planning an expedition?" He ignored the pleasantry. He pointed the clipboard at the truck like he was casting a banishment spell. "What is that?" "That," I said, leaning casually against the pump panel, "is a 1998 Pierce Dash. Top-mount pump, 1,500 gallons per minute, 500-gallon tank. She's a beauty, right? Low mileage for a municipal vehicle." "Jack," Brendan whispered, stepping closer. "You cannot park a fire truck in your driveway." "Why not?" "Because—" He gestured wildly at the neighborhood. "Because this is a residential area. Because it's an eyesore. Because it violates every single rule in the covenant." He began furiously flipping through the papers on his clipboard. "Article 4, Section C. No commercial vehicles visible from the street. Article 9, Section A. Nuisance structures. Article—" "It's not a commercial vehicle, Brendan," I interrupted. "I don't have a business. I'm not fighting fires for profit. It's for personal use." Brendan stopped flipping. He looked up, a vein throbbing in his forehead. A smug grin spread across his face. He had found it, the kill shot. "Article 14, he recited from memory, his eyes gleaming with malicious joy. "Section B. No recreational vehicles, boats, campers, or trailers may be parked in driveways or on the street for a period exceeding 24 hours. This," he gestured to the truck, "is an oversized recreational vehicle. You're using it for fun. It's an RV. Move it, or I'm calling the tow truck and fining you $500 a day." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent the last 2 weeks reading legal documents until his eyes bled. It was the smile of a trap springing shut. "You're right about the rule, Brendan," I said softly. "No RVs." I pushed off the truck and walked over to him, invading his personal space just enough to make him uncomfortable. "But this isn't an RV," I said. "It has a cab," Brendan spat. "It's a vehicle. You're clearly using it for whatever this midlife crisis is." "Read the second half of Section B, Brendan," I said. He blinked. "What?" "The second half. The exemption clause." Brendan looked down at his clipboard. He hesitated. He knew I wouldn't be this confident unless I had something. He flipped to the page. His eyes scanned the text. I saw the exact moment his soul left his body. Commercial vehicles prohibited unless used for active home or lawn maintenance. "You see, Brendan," I said, my voice dripping with faux innocence, "this isn't a recreational vehicle. It's a tool, a very large, very powerful water distribution system." "It's a fire truck," Brendan choked out. "It's a pump," I corrected. "Attached to a chassis, for watering my lawn." "You can't be serious." "I take my fescue very seriously, Brendan. You know that. You measured it last week." Brendan looked at the massive truck. He looked at the deluge gun mounted on top, capable of stripping paint off a building at 50 yards. He looked at me. "This is lawn equipment?" he asked, his voice trembling with rage. "State of the art," I said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to wax the fender. It really brings out the shine in the hydrangeas." I turned my back on him and started climbing up into the cab. As I slammed the heavy steel door, I saw Brendan standing there, clutching his clipboard, looking small and beige against the glorious, radiant red of my victory. This was going to be a fun summer. To understand why a 35-year-old software engineer would purchase a 6-ton emergency vehicle on eBay at 3:00 a.m., you have to understand the tyranny of the beige letter. It started 2 weeks ago. I am a simple man. I like coffee, I like silence, and I like the outdoors. My dream was modest. I wanted to buy a Sprinter van. You know the ones. Tasteful, gray, converted into a little camper so I could drive to the national parks on weekends, sleep under the stars, and pretend I didn't have a mortgage. I bought the van. It was sleek. It fit in my driveway. It was quieter than my neighbor's Prius. 3 days after I brought it home, I went to my mailbox and found it. The envelope was beige. The paper inside was beige. Even the font, I swear, had a beige undertone to it. It was a notice of violation from the Oak Creek Estates HOA. Dear resident, it has come to our attention that a Class B motorhome, recreational vehicle, is currently parked on your premises. This is a violation of Article 14, Section B of the Community Covenant. Please remove the vehicle immediately to avoid fines commencing at $500 per diem. $500 a day. I stared at the letter. Then I looked at the van. It was parked perfectly. It wasn't blocking the sidewalk. It wasn't rusting on blocks. It was a brand new $60,000 vehicle that looked better than Brendan's Subaru Outback. I tried to be reasonable. I really did. I went to the monthly HOA meeting that Tuesday. It was held in the basement of the community center, a room that smelled of floor wax and judgment. The board sat at a long folding table, elevated slightly on a riser so they could look down on us peasants. Brendan sat in the middle, wielding the gavel like Thor's hammer. Item 4, Brendan announced. Jack Miller, appeal regarding transient dwelling unit. I stood up. It's not a transient dwelling unit, Brendan. It's a van. It fits in the driveway. It's my primary mode of transportation for weekends. It has a bed in it, Mrs. Gable, the treasurer, said suspiciously. She was a woman who looked like she washed her hair with vinegar. So does a semi-truck, but those aren't RVs, I argued. Look, it's tasteful, it's clean, it's not an eyesore. Brendan sighed, taking off his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. Jack, it's not about taste. It's about aesthetic cohesion. If we let you keep a camper, next thing you know, people are parking dilapidated fishing boats and monster trucks. It's a slippery slope. It's a Sprinter van, I pleaded. Half the contractors you hire to fix the clubhouse drive the same vehicle. Contractors are exempt, Brendan said dismissively. They are performing maintenance. You are performing recreation. So if I put a ladder on the roof and claimed I fixed gutters, it would be okay? Do you fix gutters, Jack? Brendan asked, raising an eyebrow. No. Then the request is denied. Move it by Friday, or we begin levying fines. He banged the gavel. Next item. The unauthorized shade of beige on the Johnson's retaining wall. I walked out of that meeting with a buzzing in my ears. It was the sound of logic dying. I went home. I parked the Sprinter van in the garage, scratching the roof paint because the clearance was off by an inch. I sat in my kitchen, opened a beer, and stared at the beige letter on the counter. Aesthetic cohesion. Contractors are exempt. I pulled up the HOA covenant on my laptop. It was a PDF file so large it made my browser lag. 400 pages of rules dictating everything from the species of trees we could plant to the permissible holidays for wreath hanging. I read. I drank another beer. I read some more. I got to Article 14. No recreational vehicles, boats, or trailers. Commercial vehicles prohibited unless used for active home or lawn maintenance. I read it again. Unless used for active home or lawn maintenance. The intent of the rule was obvious. It was meant to allow Joe the plumber to park his van while he fixed your toilet, or the landscaping crew to park their truck while they mowed your grass. But intent doesn't hold up in court. Wording does. I looked out the window at my lawn. It was green, but it was dry. It needed water. What kind of vehicle is used for lawn maintenance? A truck with a tank? A truck with a hose? I Googled heavy-duty lawn watering truck. Nothing. I Googled water tanker. Too industrial. Then, a targeted ad on the side of the screen caught my eye. It was for a government surplus auction site, govdeals.com, surplus emergency vehicles. Ending soon, I clicked it, and there she was. Lot number 492, 1998, Pierce-Pumper, 45,000 miles. Formerly of the Tippecanoe Volunteer Fire Department. Runs strong. Pump certification expired 2021. Siren sticks. Sold as is. The current bid was $4,500. That was cheaper than the fines for 10 days of owning the Sprinter van. I looked at the photo. The truck was massive. It was aggressive. It was a bright, unapologetic fire engine red that would clash with every single beige, taupe, and greyja house in Oak Creek Estates. It was the exact opposite of aesthetic cohesion. But it had a pump. It had hoses. It was designed fundamentally to move water from a tank to a location of the operator's choosing. If I used it to water the grass, it was lawn maintenance equipment. I imagined Brendan's face. I imagined the look of horror as he realized that by banning a sleek, modern van, he had invited a 40-foot monster into his kingdom. My finger hovered over the Place Bid button. "Jack," I said to the empty room, "this is a terrible idea. You don't know how to drive a fire truck. You don't know how to fix a fire truck. This is petty, expensive, and insane." I took a sip of beer. "However," I countered, "Brendan is a dick." I clicked BID. The screen refreshed. "You are the high bidder." I sat back, feeling a rush of adrenaline that no amount of extreme camping could ever provide. I had just declared war, and I was bringing the heavy artillery. Buying a fire truck is disturbingly easy. Buying a house takes 30 days, a blood sample, and the sacrifice of a firstborn child. Buying a 12-ton emergency vehicle capable of leveling a small building takes 3 clicks and a PayPal account. The confirmation email hit my inbox at 3:04 a.m. "Congratulations, you have won lot number 492, 1998, Pierce-Pumper. Location, Tippecanoe, Ohio. Pickup required within 48 hours. I stared at the screen. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the cold, clammy realization of what I had just done. I didn't own a fire truck. I owned a problem. A very large, very red problem located 300 miles away. I slept for 2 hours, dreamed I was being chased by a sentient fire hydrant, and woke up with a singular purpose. I booked a one-way flight to Columbus, rented a compact car to get to Tippecanoe, and arrived at the volunteer fire station just as the sun was hitting the cornfields. The fire chief was a man named Earl. Earl looked exactly like you'd expect a guy named Earl to look. Mustache thick enough to filter particulates, suspenders, and a skeptical expression that suggested he knew I was an idiot before I even opened my mouth. "You the internet guy?" Earl asked, spitting something dark into a styrofoam cup. "That's me," I said, extending a hand. "Jack." Earl didn't shake it. He just gestured to the bay doors. She's out back. Batteries are fresh. Tank's empty. Siren switch sticks if you hit a pothole, so don't hit potholes. Good to know, I said. Does she run well? She's a beast, Earl said fondly. Detroit diesel, Allison transmission. She'll pull a house down if you ask her to. Just watch the air brakes. They're touchy. You sneeze on the pedal, you're going through the windshield. We walked around the back, and there she was. In the photos, she looked big. In person, she was geological. Big Red, as I immediately christened her, was a wall of diamond plate and faded gold leaf lettering. She was majestic. She was terrifying. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. You got a CDL? Earl asked casually. Ah, well, I stammered. Technically, since it's registered as a private historic vehicle and stripped of official markings, and under the specific weight class for non-commercial use in my state. Earl stared at me. So no. No. Good luck, Earl said, tossing me a set of keys that weighed a pound. Don't run over my fence. Getting into the driver's seat felt like climbing into the cockpit of a mech warrior. The seat was air ride. The steering wheel was horizontal, like a bus. The dashboard was a sea of analog gauges, toggle switches, and warning lights. I turned the key. The engine didn't start. It detonated into life. The entire truck shook. The roar was deafening. It was the sound of raw, unadulterated power. I put it in drive. I released the parking brake. Pss-sh-t, I tapped the gas. We lurched forward. I felt invincible. The drive home was a learning experience. I learned that lane assist in a fire truck consists of sheer terror keeping you between the lines. I learned that other cars don't just move out of your way, they flee. I was parting the sea of traffic on I-71 like Moses with a diesel addiction. About 2 hours in, hunger struck. My brain, running on no sleep and high-octane anxiety, made a critical error. I saw the golden arches. I thought, I need a McDouble. I pulled off the highway. I navigated the entrance to the McDonald's. I approached the drive-through lane. It was only when the roof of the truck scraped the Clearance 9 to go sign with the sound of a dying banshee that I realized my mistake. I slammed on the brakes. Psst. The truck rocked to a halt. I was wedged. I couldn't go forward. The overhang was too low. I couldn't go backward. A Prius was glued to my bumper. I leaned out the window, which was roughly at the height of the roof of the McDonald's. Hello? I yelled at the speaker box, which was 3 feet below me. Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order? A tinny voice squawked. Yeah, I need you to tell the Prius behind me to back up, I shouted. I am structurally incompatible with your architecture. Sir, please pull forward. I literally cannot. I am in a fire truck. Sir, are we on fire? Not yet, but my dignity is incinerated. It took 20 minutes. The manager, and a shameful 3-point turn over a curb, crushing a shrub, to extricate Big Red from the drive-thru. I ate my nuggets in a parking lot across the street, staring at the truck, realizing that my life had fundamentally changed. I could no longer do normal things. I was now a truck person. The rest of the trip was smooth until I hit the state line. I hit a pothole. Whoop, whoop, wee-oo. The siren. The stuck siren. It blared. It screamed. It was loud enough to wake the dead and annoy them. I frantically slapped the dashboard. I toggled every switch. Nothing. I drove for 3 miles with the siren wailing, terrified I was going to be arrested for impersonating a hero. Finally, I hit another pothole. Wee-oo. Click. Silence. I let out a breath I'd been holding for 10 minutes. Then I saw the blue lights in the rearview mirror. Damn it. I pulled over. The state trooper approached cautiously, hand on his holster. I rolled down the window. "Afternoon, officer," I said, trying to look like a guy who definitely belonged in a fire truck. He looked at the truck. He looked at my casual hoodie. He looked at the empty passenger seat where a Dalmatian should be. "Son," he said, "you want to explain why you were running Code 3 on the interstate?" "Electrical short," I said quickly. "Just bought it, taking it home to restore it." "Restore it?" "Yes, sir. History, heritage, parades." He walked around the truck. He checked the plates. I had taped the temporary tag in the back window. He came back. "It's a lot of truck for one guy," he noted. "I have a lot of respect for the profession," I lied. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he cracked a smile. "Just keep the noise down. And fix that switch. Next time I write you up." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." I merged back onto the highway. I was sweating. I was exhausted. But I was close, and I had practiced my lie. Parades was a good one. But for Brendan? For Brendan, it had to be better. Back in the present, the silence of my driveway was broken by the arrival of a police cruiser. Brendan stood at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, looking like a general who had just called in an airstrike. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. "You're done, Jack," he shouted over the fence. "Public nuisance, unauthorized vehicle, impersonating emergency services. I threw the book at you." "You threw a phone call, Brendan," I retorted, wiping a smudge off the chrome bumper with my sleeve. "Relax. Your blood pressure is going to ruin your polo shirt." The cruiser door opened. Out stepped Officer Miller. I knew Miller. Not personally, but I knew the type. He was about 50, with the weary, heavy-lidded eyes of a man who had spent 30 years breaking up domestic disputes over lawnmowers and writing tickets for expired tags. He looked at Brendan. He looked at the truck. He looked at me. He took off his hat and rubbed his head. "All right," Miller said, his voice sounding like gravel tumbling in a dryer. "Who called it in?" "I did." Brendan shot his hand up like a teacher's pet. "Brendan Smythe, HOA. President, this man is creating a disturbance. He is parking an illegal commercial vehicle in a residential zone. He is devaluing our homes." Miller turned to me. "This your rig?" "Yes, sir," I said respectfully. "You a fireman?" "No, sir." "You planning on starting a fire?" "God, no." Miller sighed. He walked up to the truck and tapped the side panel with his baton. Clang. Solid steel. "So," Miller said, turning back to me, "why is there a fire engine in your driveway, son?" This was it. The moment of truth. The rehearsals in the mirror, the research, the money, it all came down to this sentence. I stood up straight. I looked Miller in the eye. "Officer," I said, with the gravity of a surgeon explaining a complex procedure, "my fescue is incredibly thirsty. This is a high-capacity mobile hydration unit." Miller stared at me. He didn't blink. Brendan let out a noise that sounded like a dying cat. "He's lying. It's a fire truck. He's mocking the rules." "Hydration unit?" Miller repeated slowly. "Yes, sir," I continued. "The HOA covenant, Article 14, Section B, specifically prohibits commercial vehicles unless used for active home or lawn maintenance. I have a large yard. The standard hose wasn't cutting it. I needed more pressure, more volume. Efficiency is key, officer." Miller looked at Brendan. "Is that what the rule says?" "That's a loophole!" Brendan screamed. "It's meant for landscapers, not this." "But does it say that?" Miller asked. "It says lawn maintenance," Brendan shrieked. Miller turned back to me. A tiny, almost imperceptible glint of amusement appeared in his eyes. "So, you're telling me you use this solely for watering the grass?" "And the occasional rinse of the driveway," I added. "Dust is a killer." Can you demonstrate? Miller asked. Excuse me? I faltered. Demonstrate, Miller said, crossing his arms. If it's lawn equipment, show me how you maintain the lawn. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't actually hooked it up yet. I knew the theory. I knew the tank was full. Earl had filled it to test the seals before I left. But I had never actually fired the water cannon. Absolutely, I said, feigning confidence. Stand back. Safety first. I climbed up to the top mount pump panel. It was a dizzying array of levers and gauges. I remembered Earl's voice. Engage the PTO. Open the tank-to-pump valve. Open the discharge. I flipped the switch. The engine RPMs ramped up automatically. The truck shuddered. The pump whined. Engaging hydration, I yelled. I grabbed the handle of the deck gun, the massive water cannon mounted on top of the truck. I aimed it at a dry patch of grass near the oak tree in the front yard. I pulled the lever. I expected a stream. Maybe a garden hose plus. What I got was the wrath of Poseidon. Whoosh! A solid bar of water thick as a telephone pole erupted from the nozzle. The recoil nearly knocked me off the truck. The water hit the ground with the force of a meteor. It didn't just water, the grass. It obliterated it. Mud exploded into the air. Too much pressure, I screamed, wrestling the lever. The stream walked up the lawn. It hit Mrs. Higgins' birdhouse. The birdhouse didn't break. It vanished. It was simply deleted from existence, turned into splinters and kinetic energy. Jesus! Brendan ducked behind the police cruiser. I yanked the lever back. The water cut off instantly. Silence returned to the neighborhood, broken only by the sound of water raining down from the tree branches and the drip, drip, drip of a crater I had just excavated in my front lawn. I stood on top of the truck, dripping wet from the spray, heart hammering. Officer Miller walked over to the crater. He looked at the mud. He looked at the pulverized remains of the birdhouse. He looked up at me. Well, Miller said, that's definitely watered. It has settings? I wheezed. I was on deep clean, Miller chuckled. It started as a rumble in his chest and turned into a full-blown laugh. He shook his head. Brendan, Miller said, turning to the cowering HOA president. He's got you. It's a pump, it's moving water, it's maintenance. He destroyed a birdhouse, Brendan cried. Civil matter, Miller said, walking back to his car. He's on his own property. Vehicle is registered as private utility. No laws broken here. Miller stopped at his door and looked back at me. Hey, hydration unit. Yes, officer? Don't wash the car with that. You'll strip the paint. Noted, sir. Miller drove off. I stood on the roof of my fire truck, surveying the destruction. I had a hole in my yard. I had a furious neighbor. But I had the law on my side. You missed a spot, Brendan muttered, then stormed off toward his house, aggressively entering numbers into his phone. I sat down on the diamond plate roof and looked at the sky. I need to get a permit for a deck, I said to myself. Winning the battle with Officer Miller was intoxicating, but the war was far from over. I had a legal foothold, but I also had a problem. I owned a fire truck, not a camper. A fire truck is designed for two things: moving water and keeping adrenaline-fueled men uncomfortable. The cab was metal. The seats were vinyl. The amenities consisted of a map light and a holder for a breathing apparatus. If I was going to prove a point by treating this thing like the RV I was denied, I needed it to be livable. But it had to be invisible. Enter Tony. Tony was recommended to me by a guy at Home Depot who saw me buying industrial Velcro and asked if I was building a dungeon. Tony was a general contractor who specialized in high-end kitchen remodels and complicated spouses. He drove a white van that smelled like sawdust and divorce settlements. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, stepping out of his van with a clipboard and a look of professional weariness. "So," Tony said, looking at my house, "you said it was a guest suite addition? Maybe a garage conversion?" "Not exactly," I said. "Follow me," I led him to the driveway. I patted the rear fender of Big Red. "This is the project." Tony stopped. He lowered his sunglasses. He looked at the truck. He looked at me. He looked at his clipboard, which presumably had granite countertops written on it, not tactical water cannon. "You want me to renovate a fire engine," Tony stated flatly. "I want you to renovate the interior of a fire engine," I corrected. "The outside must remain untouched. It needs to look like a functional piece of emergency lawn equipment. But inside, I want the Ritz-Carlton meets a submarine." Tony walked around the truck. He kicked a tire. He opened a side compartment that used to hold axes and looked into the dark, steel void. "Jack," he said, "I do kitchen islands. I do shiplap. I don't do whatever this is." "Tony," I said, pulling a wad of cash out of my pocket, "I will pay you double your hourly rate. And I have beer." Tony sighed. "Let's see the inside." We climbed into the crew cab. This was the area behind the driver's seat where the firefighters would sit. It was a large, open metal box with a bench seat that felt like it was made of concrete and regret. "Okay," I said, sweeping my arm across the space. "I'm thinking a Murphy bed here. Queen size. Has to fold up flush against the wall so it looks like a storage locker if anyone peeks in. Over there, kitchenette. Induction burner, mini fridge, espresso machine." "Where's the plumbing go?" Tony asked, tapping a steel wall. "We tap into the booster tank," I said excitedly. "It holds 500 gallons. We filter it. Boom. Endless showers." Tony stared at the pump panel visible through the rear window. "You want a backsplash next to the intake valves?" "Subway tile, Tony. Classy, but industrial." Tony rubbed his temples. "And the power?" "I have a generator," I said. "But we need to soundproof it. If the neighbors hear a generator, they'll know I'm camping. We need to disguise the noise." "Disguise it as what?" "Engine idle," I said. "Or maybe a very aggressive blender." We spent the next 3 weeks in a covert operation that would have made the CIA proud. Tony would park his van so it blocked the view from the street. We moved materials in at night. The biggest challenge was the RV aspect. An RV needs a place to relax. A fire truck cab is designed to keep you awake so you don't drive into a ditch. We ripped out the bench seat. We installed high-density foam insulation to dampen the sound of the massive diesel engine. We built custom cabinets out of diamond plate aluminum so they looked like equipment lockers, but actually held my socks and a PlayStation 5. The kitchenette was a masterpiece of deception. The sink was hidden under a fake hose repair kit lid. The fridge was disguised as a hazmat decon unit. But the pièce de résistance was the tint. Brendan was getting suspicious. I saw him walking his dog, a nervous poodle that looked like it hated him, past my house 5 times a day. He would slow down, squinting at the truck, trying to see if I was living in it. "He's trying to catch me sleeping," I told Tony one afternoon as we were installing the blackout shades. "Legally, can you sleep in it?" Tony asked, drilling a hole into the dashboard for a cup holder. "Legally? It's a gray area, but if he sees a pillow, he wins." So we went with limo black tint on every window except the windshield. But that wasn't enough. I went online and ordered custom vinyl decals to apply over the tint on the inside. When you looked into the back windows of the cab, you didn't see my bed. You saw a realistic life-sized photo of fire hoses and axes neatly arranged on a rack. "It's an optical illusion," I said proudly, standing in the driveway with Tony. From 5 feet away, the back seat looked like a storage locker. Inside, it was a climate-controlled lounge with LED mood lighting. "You're a sick man, Jack," Tony said, wiping grease off his hands. "But I gotta admit, the shower pressure is amazing." "It's a fire pump, Tony," I grinned. "It's designed to extinguish infernos. It exfoliates you in 3 seconds flat." We finished the retrofit on a Thursday. I spent my first night in the truck that Friday. I lay on my memory foam mattress, surrounded by soundproofed steel, watching Netflix on a screen hidden inside a Jaws of Life case. I fell asleep to the faint smell of diesel and victory. By the time the summer heat really set in, the Battle of Big Red had settled into a Cold War. The HOA couldn't tow the truck because Officer Miller had declared it legal maintenance equipment, but they could make my life miserable. The fines started arriving daily. Monday, $50, $100, unsightly machinery. Tuesday, $7,500, non-standard garden decor. Wednesday, $100, excessive redness. I paid them. I set up an auto draft. It was expensive, but can you really put a price on the look of an aneurysm forming on Brendan's face every time he drove past? I think not. But malicious compliance is a two-way street. If they were going to fine me for having lawn equipment, I was going to ensure that equipment was being used. I initiated Operation Green Grass. Every Saturday at 7 o'clock a.m. sharp, the earliest time permitted for yard work by the HOA bylaws, I initiated the startup sequence. The startup of a Detroit Diesel Series 60 is not a subtle event. It begins with a high-pitched whine of the starter, followed by a crank, 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 and then a thunderous roar that shakes the fillings of everyone within a 3-block radius. I would step out of my front door wearing a high-visibility vest, a plastic fire helmet I bought at a party store, and industrial ear protection. I would climb into the cab, rev the engine to build air pressure, and then engage the pump. Whirr! The neighbors initially hated it, but then something strange happened. The kids. To a 40-year-old accountant, a fire truck is a nuisance. To a 7-year-old boy, it is God. The first Saturday I ran, the pump. 3 kids from down the street gathered at the edge of my driveway on their bikes. They stared in awe. "Is it real?" one asked. "It's real!" I shouted over the engine. "Stay back! High-pressure hydration operations in progress!" I aimed the deck gun at my oak tree. Whoosh! The water blasted the leaves, knocking down dead branches and creating a localized rainstorm. The kids cheered. By the 3rd Saturday, I had an audience. Parents started bringing their coffee and standing on the sidewalk. It became an event. The weekly watering. "Hey, Jack!" shouted Mike, a neighbor 2 doors down who drove a Tesla and looked like he needed a hug. "My gutters are clogged. Can you hit 'em?" "Stand back, citizen," I yelled. I adjusted the nozzle to stream. I aimed at Mike's roof. Thwack! The jet of water hit his gutters with surgical precision, blasting out 3 years of dead leaves and a squirrel nest. "That was awesome!" Mike cheered, high-fiving his wife. Brendan, watching from his porch across the street, was losing his mind. He marched over, dodging the mist. "You are inciting a riot!" he screamed. "You are disrupting the peace!" "I am performing community service," I yelled back. "Mike's gutters were a fire hazard. I just increased the safety of the neighborhood." "Yeah, Brendan," Mike shouted. "He saved my roof. Go write a ticket for a unmulched flower bed or something." The tide was turning. I was no longer the crazy guy with the truck. I was the crazy guy with the cool truck. But I needed to push it further. The truck was livable inside, but the roof? The roof was prime real estate. It was a massive flat surface of diamond plate steel, 10 feet in the air. I called Tony. "Tony," I said, "I need a deck." "On the house?" "On the truck." Tony didn't even sigh this time. He just asked, "Teak or composite?" We built what I officially documented as an observation platform for monitoring tree health and arboreal safety. It was a deck. It had a railing made of polished aluminum piping. It had a retractable awning. It had built-in cup holders. To access it, you had to climb the rear ladder of the truck. Once you were up there, you were 10 feet above the street. You could see over everyone's fences. You were the king of the cul-de-sac. The following Saturday, after the morning watering ritual, I inaugurated the platform. I hauled a Weber grill up the ladder. I set up 4 lawn chairs. I tapped a keg of beer that I had stored in the booster tank fill chute. I invited Mike. I invited Mrs. Higgins. I helped her up the ladder. She was surprisingly spry. I invited Tony. By 2:00 p.m., we had a full-blown party happening on the roof of a fire truck. The smell of grilled burgers wafted through the neighborhood. The sound of laughter and clinking bottles filled the air. From our vantage point, we could see everything. We saw the Joneses fighting about patio furniture. We saw the Smiths trying to hide their recycling bin. And we saw Brendan. He was in his living room. We were level with his second-story window. I could see him standing there, phone to his ear, pacing back and forth. He looked up. He saw me flipping a burger. I waved with my spatula. He didn't wave back. He slammed the blinds shut. "You know," Mike said, taking a bite of a cheeseburger, "this is technically a violation of the height restriction for auxiliary structures." "It's not a structure, Mike," I said, handing Mrs. Higgins a beer. "It's a vehicle, and this isn't a party. It's a crew rest period during active operations." "Active operations?" Tony asked, looking at the empty street. "The grass," I pointed to my lawn, which was now a swampy, muddy mess from weeks of high-pressure blasting. "It's still thirsty." Mrs. Higgins burped. "I like the view," she said. "I can see Brendan's bald spot from here." We all toasted to that. But as the sun went down and the fireflies came out, dancing around the red lights of the truck, I knew this couldn't last forever. Brendan was quiet. Too quiet. He wasn't just writing fines anymore. He was plotting. He was going to bring out the big guns. I looked at the legal summons that had arrived in the mail that morning. I hadn't shown it to the guys. Case number 24, CV 0992, Oak Creek Estates. HOA versus Jack Miller, plaintiff, seeks injunctive relief and removal of vehicle. We were going to court. "More beer?" I asked the group. "Hit me," Mike said. I poured. The battle was about to move from the driveway to the courtroom, and I hoped my lawyer was as good as my plumber.